Welcome into the Oklahoman's video studio. It's Friday morning, which means two things. It's time for the weekend review, and gentlemen, there are donuts in the newsroom. So let's wrap this up so that we can get to that. Don McCoy and Ryan Sharp join us as always. Great to see you guys. Thanks for your time this morning. Don, I'll start with you. We had some interesting news about the All Sports Association earlier this week.
Yeah, our Steve Lackmar has been covering this for a while, and there's been some issues with the All Sports Association, financial issues, and they finally came to a head this week when Tim Brassfield basically sent a letter to the members of the All Sports Association pointing out that they just lacked the funds to continue doing what they've been doing. And what they've been doing is they recruit events, sporting events, amateur events, and collegiate events to the city of Oklahoma City. It's an organization that's been around since the 50s.
I was about to say, growing up in Oklahoma City, I can remember going to so many All Sports Association produced events, such as the All College Tournament.
The All College Tournament was kind of their, that was the diamond of their whole thing. And at one point, it was probably the best basketball tournament, short of the championship, that existed. You had up to 16 teams to come into Oklahoma City.
There's a lot of prestige with it.
Oh, and great teams, players like Pete Maravich that you get to see play multiple games in Oklahoma City. And so anyway, through the years, they'd been fairly successful. In recent years, they'd been less successful at attracting NCAA type tournament events. They were still affiliated with the softball, Women's Softball World Series that was going on, and it was a huge event. But they just lacked the funding and the support to keep it going. And I think part of what Steve was able to report was the city basically believes we can do what you've been doing. We have the personnel and we have the expertise.
Is that a convention visitors bureau type situation? They're like, hey, we're actually staffed to handle some of this stuff? Exactly,
and that's what they do. They recruit events, all kinds of events and conventions and things, and they've got a lot of experience dealing with things. We staged the NBA Finals here one year, and it seemed to go pretty well. Yeah. So they think they have the expertise to do it. The All Sports Association had asked the city to supplement their budget to give them like $275,000. The city said, rather than give you this taxpayer money, we're going to take it over, and that was the end of the All Sports Association.
Wow, so that's the next step here is dissolution of...
The board voted that it will be no more, so that it's pretty much over. They didn't have much that they controlled. That basketball tournament we talked about, which was an event that they kind of owned, had become OU would play in Oklahoma City every other year, and that was it. You went from this big tournament to a single game every other year. The attendance was falling off. It just didn't have the prestige that it once had.
Ryan, I'll bring you in here as sports editor. We mentioned the CVB bringing in these events, but OU played a big part in this too as the host institution for softball or for various NCAA regional tournaments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so anytime the NCAA, we had an event here, whether it was an NCAA women's tournament, regional, Big 12 women's basketball, there always has to be a host institution. And that's more for the behind-the-scenes stuff that happens. Yeah, facilitation of the event.
Sports information crew does.
Yeah, media relations, PR, things like that. That comes from more the host school. But ticket sales, setup, volunteers, things like that was always where the All Sports Association came in. So they have a massive role for a long time in a number of events. Those events that we've talked about, the Big 12 baseball tournament, things like that have been in Oklahoma City for years. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens now and who steps in to fill that void, especially on the side of organizing volunteers.
Yeah, Dodgers would pick up some of the lead on the baseball tournaments.
Yeah, and they had kind of, in the last few years, they had kind of taken over some of that anyway. The Dodgers had gotten more and more involved in the baseball tournament. OU has gotten more and more involved in the Women's College World Series. So you've kind of seen some of that stuff already starting to happen. We talked about the All College. I mean, it had gone from what we talked about, this massive event.
To a classic.
To a classic that sometimes there was one game. A couple years ago, I think they did 2 women's games, and of course attendance was terrible. And so it's kind of gone back and forth, but that's kind of fallen along the lines of college basketball in Oklahoma. Even when OU was making Final Four runs, attendance was not great when they had events in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma State's been down for a number of years now, and so the interest in college basketball is not what it used to be when the All College was in its heyday. So all that kind of plays a role, I think.
But Don, this is no small matter. Getting these tournaments and these events, these conventions to Oklahoma City, it's big money.
Yeah, there's a lot of hotels, there's a lot of businesses that live off of that kind of a business. And one of the things that the All Sports Association tried to, when they were making their case, was, Ryan mentioned volunteers. They provided, scores of volunteers for these events, and they were telling the city, you don't have our volunteers, you don't have this. So that'll be interesting to see going forward. The running of these things, there's a lot of stuff that comes into it, and the All Sports Association had been very involved in that. So the city thinks they can take care of it, and that remains to be seen.
You can find some ongoing coverage of this story online at newsok.com, and of course more coverage as it warrants in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman. Speaking of the city, state, and development around an area here just south of the Oklahoma River, the American Indian Museum. It's a story I believe we had in Friday's editions of the Oklahoman.
Yeah, Bill Crum wrote a story. It's an interesting place, that the state has tried to get this museum moving forward. The city has been involved, and it just kind of seems to be a white elephant. It just never seems to get the traction that it needs. Well, Bill reported that the Chickasaw tribe is now looking at trying to develop things around that area, and it seems like a great place for development. It's right there on the river, the Oklahoma River, where there already is a lot of development. You've got Interstate 35 and Interstate 40 that cross there.
It's very visible.
It's a very visible spot.
And it seems like there's a lot of land to be developed.
It does, and you just drive by it and you think, why isn't this a vibrant something?
Yes.
So now it appears maybe there will be something there, whether it's the museum itself or the area around it. Maybe that's going to develop first, and then maybe the museum will come. We'll see, but it just seems like such a great spot for there to be something, and maybe now there will be something.
I believe the issue in the past, as you mentioned, just like in the previous story, is money. The city and the state saying, do we need to invest money in this area? And the Chickasaws are saying, we're willing to spend some money here.
Yeah, in the surrounding area, yeah. And the museum itself, I don't know, that still remains to be seen what's going to happen with that.
I see. Two different issues here.
Yeah, and there's been, some people have said, hey, if we're going to build an American Indian Museum, the tribes need to fund this. Well, that's not been a workable, that just hasn't worked to get this going. And the state's has provided some funding. The city, could have claimed it at some point because the state wasn't getting anything done. And there's a structure there, So we will see what happens to that museum if it ever becomes what was envisioned, which was a fairly ambitious vision.
This is not tribal land, is it, in this area?
No, and in fact, one of the questions that was asked was, could that become a casino? And that was kind of X'd out at some point. We're not going to build a casino on the river right here. By some views, all of Oklahoma is Indian land, and other views, it's specific. But that was something that was taken out of the equation a long time ago.
Interesting. Certainly more to come on this story again in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman, and pick up the Friday edition of the Oklahoman. Excuse me, to read Bill Crum's reporting. One other thing that actually I'll get to that in just a second. We'll switch over to some sports. Tease ahead to some weekend coverage from our Tim Willard. That's coming up here in a second. Sports-wise, the Thunder opened its season Wednesday night, I believe, or Tuesday night?
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night earlier this week, and they play tonight, Friday night in LA. Our Eric Horn is there.
Yeah, so Tuesday night they opened their season against the Golden State Warriors. Just so happened to be the night that the Golden State Warriors were getting their championship rings in a ceremony that seemed like it took forever. That game was supposed to start at 9:30, and for us that are very deadline-oriented, that game just kept ticking and ticking and ticking.
Could have covered it in the Thursday edition.
Yeah. And so a little bit after 10 o'clock, it finally tips off, and there were some surprising things and some not so surprising things. The Thunder, even playing without Russell Westbrook, kind of held their own against the Warriors, and the Warriors were off shooting. They shot below 30% from behind the three-point line, which for them is not typical. But you saw some things out of the Thunder, just some raw athleticism that they, especially from their second unit, that's kind of been missing over the last couple of years. Dennis Schroeder, a new point guard they picked up from Atlanta, played really well alongside Steven Adams, and of course Paul George, who played really well, was streaky, just kind of like he was last year. Really rough first half, but then catches fire in the third quarter, and kept the game close. They ended up losing 108-100. But again, there was things that you saw that were kind of intriguing and promising, and of course there's some of the other stuff from last year that kind of popped up too, the missed free throws. The Thunder missed 13 free throws. You lose by 8 after missing 13 free throws, and so you kind of talk about missed opportunities. And that was kind of a holdover from last year as well. They had problems with that last year. So anyway, they're in LA tonight. They'll face the Clippers, and it's a much different Clippers team than it has been over the past 3 or 4 years. No Blake Griffin, no DeAndre Jordan. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have kind of moved on. The one intriguing guy that's there is Patrick Beverley, who folks around here are very familiar with Westbrook. It still kind of remains to be seen if Russell plays tonight. I'm going to guess probably not, and that they'll probably wait and start him when they come home. But it's Westbrook, so you never know.
Speaking of Westbrook, the Thunder has been practicing at his former stomping grounds at UCLA.
Yeah, a while back he donated some money, and they were in the process of redoing their practice gym, and so now they have this really nice practice gym that has a huge likeness of Russell Westbrook on the wall, and you step onto the court and it says Russell Westbrook Court, which I assume is a little surreal for guys that are on his team to be practicing on a court that has a guy's name on it. But they've been there the last couple of days. Eric's been out there and doing some reporting, and so he'll cover the game tonight. Again, late tip, so probably looking for most of our coverage in the Sunday paper. But we will have we'll have game coverage online in News OK tonight.
And that leads into the first home game for the Thunder, and perhaps that's when we first see Russ on the court.
Yeah, so Sunday nights, Sacramento's in town. Should be a pretty good game for the Thunder. Sacramento's a little down. But again, it'll be our first chance for folks here in Oklahoma City to see Dennis Schroeder. First time for possibly to see Westbrook on the court. I think people are going to be excited to watch Schroeder play. He's a different kind of player than what they've had at the backup point guard spot. He's athletic like Westbrook. He's crazy fast like Westbrook. And so it'll be fun to watch those guys play.
I was laughing at the TNT broadcast. Shaq was like, hold up, guys. Before we get to the highlights, what's going on with Schroeder's hair? It is a unique fashion.
It is. So for years, he's always had that little blonde spot in his hair. And it was a little strange. We showed up to media day, and he had shaved his head. And so the little blonde spot that he, which for the longest time, I thought it was a birthmark. Because you'll see that sometimes. But it was something he dyed into his hair. But it was gone at media day, so now he's got this white streak that runs all the way back across his head. So he's an interesting guy, and that's just part of him.
All right, plenty of Thunder coverage, and Eric Horn will be filing all sorts of things. He does a great job of podcasting and videos along with the columns and stories you can find online tonight at News OK. So if you're up after midnight watching the game, go to our website. He'll have coverage for you, as well as on social media and Twitter. Twitter's always an interesting beast during NBA games, isn't it?
NBA Twitter's the best.
It is the best. You've got the highs and lows.
The players get involved, you know, not necessarily during the game, unless, sometimes, but for the most part, it's just interesting across the board.
Yeah, and you've got guys like Enes Kanter and guys that are so active on social media that are fun follows. There's no telling what they're going to pop off about. And Kanter's interesting, too, because he's still a huge fan of the Thunder and the guys that are here. And so he always likes to antagonize whoever the Thunder's playing a little bit. It's always a whole lot of fun.
Then you have the locals who just hate watching the basketball.
Yeah, well, and then you have things that happen. Something can become a meme during a game.
That's right.
When I saw, Russell grabbing a snack on the bench, I saw that thing 100 times on Twitter while the game was still being played. It was very interesting.
It's amazing how fast it is. All right, some college football action. OU's back in action, and a lot of people are wondering, will the defense look any different?
Yeah, so they've had a week off. Last week we sat here and talked about Mike Stoops being fired and Ruffin McNeil taking over the defense. So now we finally get to see kind of what that's going to look like. Is it going to look a whole lot different? Probably not. It's still the same players, same schemes. But you might see some wrinkles here and there. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, TCU isn't what they have been in the past couple of years. Their offense is not great. So this might be a kind of a get-well game for Oklahoma and their defense. So it'll be awful telling pretty quick to see what changes McNeil has in store for OU.
That's an 11 a.m. tip down in Fort Worth, I believe.
Correct.
All right, OSU is off this week.
They are. It's been kind of an interesting week for OSU, coming off of another conference loss. So there's good news and bad news. One is the good news is it's been a long time for OSU fans since they've seen this happen. You're coming off of a run several years where the 10-win seasons, things like that. The 14 season is probably the last time that you saw a performance like what they had last weekend. So it's been an interesting week with Mike Gundy to try to find out if they're going to make any changes, specifically at the quarterback position. He, of course, is being pretty tight-lipped about it and not really revealing much. They'll get back into their regular week practices next week, and it'll be interesting to see if we hear anything come out of Stillwater about guys taking more reps, second-team quarterbacks taking more reps, guys like Drew Brown. Spencer Sanders, a freshman. It'll be interesting to see, especially with this new redshirt rule. Those guys can play up to 4 games and still redshirt. So you could conceivably use a different guy every game from here on out, still using Taylor Cornelius, and have both of those young guys back next year.
This is the first season this rule's been in place. Are we hearing that it's going to stay, or perhaps be changed some?
I think coaches are a fan of it because it gives you a chance to play some young guys and not burn their year. We are, if you follow us in the paper and online, our reporters kind of keep stock of who plays every single game, and so we have a thing called the redshirt tracker, where we can look at the freshmen and how many games they've played and who's still eligible to redshirt, who's not. For OU, a good case is Caleb Kelly. Caleb Kelly's a sophomore, played a lot last year, but played the first 2 games of the season and then sat a couple of games. And so all of a sudden people started asking whether or not he was going to redshirt. Well, now he's played 4 games, and we assume he's going to keep playing. He played pretty well against Texas. So we try to keep track of all of that, and that way we can have an idea of who's still eligible for a redshirt come next year. It's interesting because it gives coaches a lot of options with guys, and OSU and their quarterback position is a great example.
All right, we're 2 minutes away from getting these guys to some donuts. Don, I teased the story that Tim Willard is covering. It's an interesting dynamic, governor, state superintendent.
Yeah, it's a fairly extraordinary clash of wills here. Governor Fallin, several months ago, asked the state education department to do an evaluation of Oklahoma's hundreds of school districts and tell us which districts are spending less than 60% of their money in the classroom. You know, they have administrative costs and things like that. And she wanted to know. Well, it never happened. The study was never done. Joy Hofmeister, who's the state superintendent of schools, essentially told Tim, I don't take orders from the governor. Even though the governor issued an executive order, a numbered executive order.
And the state superintendent is an elected position.
Right, but they're of the same party. They're both Republicans. So it's very interesting. Tim gets into all the ins and outs of it. There's a lot of detail to it. And he even talks a little bit about what the numbers are as far as, you know, some of these districts that do spend less than 60% in the classroom. So it's a very readable story.
Was the governor looking at consolidation? Is that part of the aim of this? Or?
Well, that has something to do with it, yes, because they've talked about, you know, you've got some of these small districts, and their districts maybe we could put together and they could spend their allocation more efficiently because they won't have 2 superintendents. But, you know, districts are very reluctant to do that because they have long-term identities as that district. So it's a big issue, but she was trying to look at it from a financial point of view, and the school board chose not to.
Interesting stuff. Sunday's edition?
Yes, indeed.
All right, Tim Willard will have that story in Sunday's edition of the Oklahoman. Plenty of OU, OSU, and Thunder coverage throughout the weekend as well. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dave.